what's happening now here again? James O'Malley joins me as usual, and this week we are excited to have Mark Miodownik with us as well. Material scientist, engineer, prolific author. Mark, we've just been talking about the number of books, and it's getting more prolific, if that's the way of putting it. Another book out this year.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, it's called It's a Gas, and very relevant to today's topic.
It is. This week's episode is on air travel, and it's it's really helpful for us to have you here with us because there's a lot to talk about. In Liquid Rules, in your last book, you take a flight to San Francisco and dive into the safety briefing, and I think it's fair to say have a bit of a crisis of confidence over the lack of mentions of kerosene in that safety briefing. Now, I'll be honest, I'm more worried right now about the stories of windows popping out in mid-flight. I don't really need another thing to get nervous about. So I guess my first question to you, Mike, generally is, how safe is flying right now?
Oh, well, I mean, flying has been for many decades the safest form of travel per mile. So I think in terms of safety, although we get, it's like a lot of things with information now, you just get to hear about the occasional disasters, or in fact, in the case of the window popping out, it didn't actually result in a disaster, which is great. So
Really
yeah,
great.
I don't think people need to worry about the safety of air travel per se, except for the long-term safety of humans on this planet, which unfortunately it is actually going to be a problem for in the current trajectory. So safety of a person traveling on a flight today, I've got no problem with.
Okay.
Safety of the human race on this planet as a result of air travel, if we don't change something quite radically, that is not clear to me.
You started off really reassuring there, Mark, and that's quite a big caveat to go from don't worry about the flight, just worry about everybody in future ever. I'm going on holiday next month to Marrakesh. Should I feel guilty about that? Should I set off walking now? Like, where do I sit ethically on this?
I mean, I think so. The way I see it is that because that's a norm for Western rich people, and when I say rich people, what I mean is if you don't have to worry about whether you're going to be able to eat today, or whether you can pay your rent in the next few months, you're kind of rich by world terms, and rich people go on holiday by plane, and that's a kind of norm. So in that sense, it's hard to feel guilty about something that's a norm that you probably grew up with, that your parents had as well. But so I don't want to guilt laden you, but the CO2 emissions of air travel are big, and they're getting bigger, and also we don't really have a plan that makes any sense to reduce them. So in that sense, I feel increasingly guilty, and I'm sure there's not a part of you that is also feels guilty. And I sort of think that we have to reduce our air travel to reduce that guilt. And I would say one flight a year you cannot feel guilty about. Like one flight a year, fine. If you take more than one flight a year, whether it's for social life, I mean holidays, or whether it's for work, you really need to do something about it.
Okay, so my answer now is I'm going to go on holiday and feel terrible about it the whole time, I think, is how I'm going to approach this. But do you know what? There is a silver lining, isn't there? Because I saw a great story, a headline recently about the first flight on 100% sustainable aviation fuel. So, I mean, that's a wonderful news, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think that's really greenwash at the moment, unfortunately. I'd love it to be not greenwash, but the problem with that whole idea is, and what does it mean, sustainable aviation fuel? So at the moment, aviation fuel is kerosene, so it's kind of like diesel, somewhere around like that, a very energy dense liquid that we get from fossil fuels. The sustainable air fuel, so called, is one in which you get that hydrocarbon, so like a diesel, like oil, but you get it from plants that they grow. And the idea that it's sustainable is that, so all the CO2 emissions that are going to be generated in that flight were drawn down by the plants into the oil when it was growing as a crop, so it's carbon neutral. It sort of glosses over the fact that in order to kind of harvest the crop and to kind of squeeze out all the oil and refine it, that all costs energy. Um, so it's not kind of carbon neutral in that sense. But the idea is that, okay, but it's still better, and therefore it makes it more sustainable. The big problem with the logic is when you calculate how much land you need in order to replace current aviation fuel used globally with that kind of fuel, you run out of land for food. It's quite quickly. So it's when you use the word sustainable, in which actually most of the world could never use this fuel, that seems to me to be a bit of greenwash.
So I suppose one of the challenges with air travel, particularly, is you've got to keep a plane in the air, so you need an energy-dense fuel. Are there any sort of alternatives on the horizon, do you think? Are there any sort of cutting-edge alternatives, whether it's another form of synthetic fuel, or can we use hydrogen, or is there any sort of hope out there for somehow solving this seemingly impossible problem?
Yeah, so absolutely, there is many things that people are touting. So the first one is electric, because hold on a minute, we're electrifying cars. Can't we just do the same for planes? And it turns out we can, but there's a bit of a problem with it. So in the case of cars, we know that there's a range problem. So you can't store as much energy in an electric battery as you can in a liquid fuel like petrol, diesel, and so the energy per weight of your car, it goes down, so you have a lower range. So you might only be able to travel 200 miles before having to refuel in the case of an electric car. In the case of a plane, you're not going in the horizontal, you're actually going in the air. So weight becomes even more critical, and that makes much bigger the restrictions on how far you can travel with an electric plane or how many people could go in it. So at the
Hmm.
moment, people think the best case scenario is that an electric plane from London to Paris carrying 20 passengers might be commercially viable in 10 or 15 years' time. That's the kind of where we're at with it. But anything more than that seems fiction because of this real restriction on the energy density of batteries, and also the cost of that flight will be much higher. So
Hmm.
yeah, that's one option, and it's not. It definitely seems like a step forward. Um, but we've got the Eurostar, and that's would be much more efficient way of taking people from London to Paris. So in a way, it's not solving a big problem for us, because the big problem we want to solve is being able to fly to America or all around the world, and that will not be solved by electric. So then the question is, what else can we do? And the answer is, well, there's two other ones on the horizon. One is hydrogen. So this is a gas which is very energy dense, or quite energy dense, but you'd have to squeeze it into a liquid to put it on a plane to get enough of it to fly to America, and that requires you to cool it down to sort of very cold temperatures, cryogenic temperatures, and that means that means it becomes very high pressure, that tank, and there's a lot of safety concerns around that, and we just don't have the technology for doing that in the air that can hold enough fuel reliably and safely to kind of get planes off the ground using that at the moment. So that is a kind of touted future. Airbus in particular think that they might get one in the air by 2035. Still
Hmm.
quite a long way away, and again, there's lots of unknowns. And then the third way is that we have these kind of e-fuels, these where we basically take renewable energy and we use it to kind of harvest CO2 from the air, um, and we turn it into a hydrocarbon. And because it's renewable energy, we're sucking CO2 out of the air, so we're doing something great in terms of reducing CO2, and we're making it into a fuel. So hooray, hooray! Surely that's like the answer, but it's totally unproven technology, and also we have a shortage of renewable energy. So um, it's yeah. So none of these scenarios really. That's why we're in the science world. We're quite skeptical about sustainable kind of claims of the aviation industry, because there isn't actually a solution that is technically works at the moment, let alone economically works.
That's what I wanted to ask as a sort of follow up, is that when you mentioned about the e-fuels, is it a case of we still need someone to have the eureka moment, the splitting of the atom, the fundamental scientific breakthrough, or is it a case of in a lab they can create this sort of fuel in small quantities, but someone needs to invent a way to sort of scale it up and just make it into a sort of industrialized process that you can have at every airport in the world?
Yeah, I think that it's that, and so even so, yeah, I made it sound like it was sort of needed a massive technological breakthrough, but yeah, it's sort of like to do it at scale is what we don't have, and the scale is quite huge because at any one point there's a million people in the air at 24 hours, 360 days a year. So our aviation industry is keeping people in the air with huge amounts of fuel at the moment, and to be able to get to that scale of enthusiasm and delight that people have going on holiday or flying around the world for other reasons, we just the infrastructure, the kind of technological efficiency, all of that would need to be developed.
I guess my question, Mark, is what's the realistic next step? Like, is it down to consumers? Is it down to individuals to cut travel? Is it down to governments to bring policy in that would change, or is it down to the industry?
Well, so the logical next step would be to tax aviation fuel, right? So to say to people, okay, we need to invest in these different alternatives for the future, so we need somewhere to get that money from, and we'll just tax current users. So that means that people who want to fly a lot will end up making it more sustainable by giving us the income to do that. But the problem is that no one will agree at an international tax on this, and so kerosene, the main fuel, is not taxed. So it's actually cheaper than it's untaxed. Whereas the fuel you use for going around in your car or lorry, that's all taxed. So this is like a crazy situation where one of our biggest environmental concerns doesn't even have a sort of income stream to create the situation where we could start to invest in these different alternatives very easily. So in a way, you say, well, just a tax aviation fuel, but there's no one who'll agree to do it because as soon as you mute that, you have all sorts of different competing interests worldwide wanting to shoot that down. So if we put that to one side, then you have just a normal kind of capitalist innovation that might happen in order for us to kind of make an electric vehicle work or a hydrogen vehicle work. And in both those two cases, the timeline is 15, 20 years, really, to get to the scale. Well, not even to get to the scale we have now, but to make huge progress. Um, so then you're like, oh my goodness, that sounds like we haven't got any good choices in front of us.
I didn't
And
want to
that's
say that
the
exactly,
truth.
Mark, but yeah, there's no good choices.
The truth is, people have to stop flying a lot more. Now, the good news is that most of the air miles in the West, in the rich countries, is by a relatively few set of people. So actually, it isn't a lot of people who have to stop flying once a week, but there's tons of people who fly once a week. So that's 52 flights a year. That's crazy when we've got climate change happening. It's just madness. And we have to get those top 10% of flyers to stop doing that. I think that's just fair. That's just a fairness thing. And then I don't think it's good to say to people you can't have your holiday. Sam, I think where are you going to a lovely island somewhere?
No,
I think.
don't let me say it again because I'll sound like one of the problem. No, I'm feeling
No, but
guilty already.
no. I think you should. I think this transition needs to be fair, and I think one flight a year, as I see it, would be like in the next few years that everyone should be able to do that. But we're probably going to have to do less than that going on. So unless we make significant progress, we're all going to have to do much, much less than that. So I'd say enjoy it while it lasts.
Okay, do you know what? I'm going to fly there, and then when we get there, I'll tell my wife that it's one flight a year and we have to walk back. I'm sure that'll go down very well, but we've got to do our bit. So tax, air passenger duty expansion to cover kerosene and impact on the habits of people, policy. You'd like to see that as a scientist. You'd like to see tax changes and policy in the next election coming up saying, do you know what? As a society, we need to do something different.
I mean, I think I don't think people have really got the sense of how urgent this is. And here's how I would put it: if on your worry list are things like the price of food, immigration, and cost of living in general, if those, let's say, those are your top three worries as a person, which sounds to me quite reasonable, so you're maybe not worried about climate change because it seems like too far down the list. But all those top three are going to be driven by climate change. So there's going to be more pressure on immigration. There's going to be much more expensive food, and everything is going to get more expensive. So it's like not concentrating on this is like it, it's like it's just going to make all the worries and problems get worse. It's an accelerator. So, and the one thing you want to cut down in that situation is the luxuries, right, on our CO2 emissions, and it's much harder to cut, gas heating to people's houses because they'll freeze, they'll die. But you can cut people's use of air flight. You can, because they're not going to generally die, right? And we saw with COVID that actually people, holidayed within the UK and they didn't have such a miserable time, did they? I mean, and also there were more jobs in the UK, and that sort of drove the economy. So in a way, you can sort of think that's going to win, isn't it? So as I see it, yes, you've got to pitch it not as a kind of negative, but as a kind of like, this is going to make your life better because it's not going to make all your worries worse next year and the year after, which otherwise, if you ignore it, it will.
Okay, well, no ignoring that does make sense. Looking at it from another angle, not in terms of people actually flying, but in terms of the climate impact so far and going forward. Are there any radical strategies that we can do to help clean up the climate?
I mean, there are radical strategies around trying to seed particles into the atmosphere, which would to reflect more light from the sun, and so it doesn't heat the earth. The problem with those is that if you get them wrong, they actually make the problem worse. So you're and the history of those kind of interventions is not good. Like we're just not very good at we're not godlike enough yet to be able to kind of control our atmosphere. We're at the whim of it, actually, and I think that's what we're. So the idea that we can somehow reverse all this, I think, seems very unlikely to me. I guess we might get to the point in the middle of this century where we don't have any other ideas, but I hope that's not where we are now. We actually have very good technologies for solving this problem. That's what's quite frustrating, is we sort of know what to do. It's just we're not doing it fast enough. And so I think going to a kind of really radical solution at this point wouldn't be my next step. I think people can. It doesn't mean that your life has to be kind of miserable as a result of us doing these. In fact, quite the reverse. I think we just need to kind of get our head around the fact that, that flying somewhere or not flying somewhere can be just as enjoyable. And it just requires a reversal of or a change in your mindset. So, for instance, I had to go to a conference in Vienna recently, which meant I took an overnight sleeper train from Paris to Vienna. So I went to bed in Paris, having had a nice glass of wine and a good meal, and then I woke up in Vienna, and this is just a sleeper train. And okay, what's so bad about that? That was fantastic. Like, it didn't stop me going to this conference. I didn't emit huge amounts of CO2 emissions. I mean, I just feel like we are a creative species, and just we can do this, right? We just need to be more creative about this.
Cool. And finally, Mark, maybe this is just going to make Sam more depressed when he thinks about it on his holiday. But as a materials scientist, are there any other things we should be worrying about? Obviously, we're talking about air travel today and how difficult that is to decarbonize. But are there any other sort of industrial processes? Are there any other really difficult problems that we should be worrying more about, which are sort of analogous to sort of air travel in terms of the sort of climate impact?
Well, I mean, I think pollution is probably another one that we should probably needs a more creative solution. So, for instance, plastic pollution is an epidemic. There's basically a lorry load of plastic going into the ocean every minute. That's essentially what we're doing to the planet, and that's basically putting huge pressure on all our ecosystems. So, bird populations, marine life. And soil fertility all going down as a result of doing that. All things that we rely on. That's our life support system. So we're crazy to do it. And then there's also questions about whether the small bits of plastic, as a result of all that, we know are getting into our bloodstream. We know actually there's some recent results that they crossing the barrier of the gut into the body. We're eating them. If you have a bottle of water, you're actually ingesting thousands of microplastics particles just a bottle of water that you bought from a shop, which you think must be the purest way to drink water, but it turns out it isn't. And when bottled water has microplastics in it, you have to really start to take stock and go, hold on a minute. Do we not need to completely revise how we are doing stuff with the way we package stuff? Although we don't know about the medical implications yet, I think over the next few years it might become. I just couldn't predict which way it's going to go, but it's certainly not good that we're ingesting so much plastic into our bodies.
That's terrifying because all I drink is bottled water. This is my one vice.
That's your vice. That's your big rebellion against life, is drinking bottled water.
Yeah.
Take
Well,
that, Mum and Dad. I'm going to drink some bottled water now.
And give up water. And Sam, you need to.
Mark, it's been a genuine pleasure to speak to you, but I'm now dreading my holiday where I go flying abroad and flying home, and while I'm there, refuse to drink bottled water. So it's been eye-opening and a really timely conversation, though. So we really do appreciate your time.
No, it's been great being on the show, and honestly enjoy your holiday, because it's not about sorting the planet out is not about having less fun. It really isn't. It's just different choices.
Okay, a good note to finish on. Mark Miodownik, thank you so much.